I got wrongly accused of cheating by the school's popular guy. On my birthday, my childhood buddy showed up to make things right. We've been in the same class forever. No reason to stay mad, really. So, I ditched her birthday present, trashed everything connected to her, and completely stepped out of her life. I meant to cut ties for good. But years later, at a business party, she caught sight of me in the crowd instantly. Right there in front of everyone, my old friend was surrounded by admirers, tears in her eyes. Was that fun? You've been dodging me for 7 whole years. During a break, the classroom entrance was packed, everyone peeking inside. Just one break, and the news that Diego from Class 3 falsely accused someone of cheating had spread all over school. Diego stood by the desk, looking serious. The desk was crooked, and a bunch of people were around him offering comfort, but their eyes kept darting to me. I was the kid Diego wrongfully blamed. Diego was the class president. Maybe he messed up trying to keep order. Everyone slips up sometimes. It's just a mix-up. Nothing unforgivable. Right? As soon as I thought that, a lot of people nodded, looking my way, expecting me to step up and make peace with Diego. Seeing their hopeful looks, my heart sank, feeling excluded all over again. Our school divided classes by grades, and Class 3 was the top one I'd fought hard to join. Diego always had a good rep. Handsome, friendly, the school heartthrob. Everyone usually acted like they were tight, but when real stuff happened, no one backed up someone like me, a transfer student. I bit my lip, not wanting to back down. Diego deserved an apology, they thought. But he suddenly looked at me, his face dark and his tone super harsh. Fine, my bad, I shouldn't have stood up for the class and rules. Sorry, is that enough, Leo? His attitude was totally reluctant. Before I could say anything, he just stood up and left the classroom. Then, a bunch of people outside started talking, sensing something was off. I followed him out and saw Diego surrounded by a group. He was hunched over, holding his ankle, sweating, looking pale. People were saying Diego's folks had a car crash, he's been shaky emotionally. Does he really need more pressure? I couldn't believe it. Was an apology really that crucial? The crowd around me cleared, and I stood there confused, meeting the eyes of Isabella, who had just come out of the office. Isabella had gorgeous eyes, usually cold to everyone. But with me, there was always some warmth. Now, though, her eyes were full of clear reproach. In a flash, I got it. Isabella was blaming me, too. Diego stumbled on the stairs for a moment. Isabella quickly helped him to the infirmary, his arm resting on her shoulder. Diego gave me a cold look, full of mockery. It was real mockery. It felt like he saw right through me. Diego had caught on to my hidden feelings for Isabella. I was sure the accusation was on purpose. After we got back from the infirmary, Isabella came to find me. The evening breeze messed up her hair as she leaned on the railing, turning to look at me. Is it really that important to you? Just one word. Her tone was the same as always. Nothing seemed different, but I could feel she was blaming me, just like everyone else. A lump formed in my throat, making me speechless. After a long pause, I looked down, forcing a bitter smile. I don't get it. How did his playing the victim make me look wrong? Isabella looked stunned for a sec. Maybe my bitter smile was too much. As her expression softened, I thought, what act? He really hurt his ankle. Plus, I never said you were wrong. Isabella looked away. I just think there's no need to blow it up. The school bell rang urgently, each chime sinking my heart deeper. I stood there, quietly watching Isabella, feeling a weird sense of betrayal. Was it really about not making a big deal? Or something else? By the time school ended, Isabella was gone. Diego's seat was empty too. Someone told me Isabella had stuff to do and to head home alone. I nodded and said, "Oh," a mix of feelings I couldn't name. On my way home, groups of people walked together, laughing and chatting. I rode my bike with my head down. For some reason, memories started flooding back. In our old neighborhood, Isabella was well known. Everyone knew that although she seemed cold, she was fiercely protective. Whenever I got into a fight, Isabella was always the first to rush to my side, even without knowing the details. I lost my parents young and was raised by my grandma in that old neighborhood. Isabella often followed me around, calling me big brother and stuff. But gradually, she awkwardly started avoiding those terms. She began calling me by my full name, Liam Cole. I'd lazily watch her as I carried her school bag. "Your wings have hardened, and now you dare to call me by my name." It was like she'd been caught. She'd lower her head and mumble, "What, big brother? You're only a few days older than me." As if defying me on purpose, she'd puff up her cheeks and shout, "I'll just call you Liam, 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 Liam." Isabella thought I'd scold her like before, so she turned and ran away quickly. But I didn't. I stood there for a long time, resigned, and said, all right, I can't control you anymore." Then I chuckled softly, just fine. I never liked being called big brother. By the time I came back to my senses, the sky had already turned dark. The walk from school to home wasn't far, but during that walk, I must have turned around like a spinning top 100 times. On the dimly lit path, there was never a familiar figure in sight. The next day, Isabella waited for me to walk to school together as usual. It seemed like nothing had changed, but on the way, I couldn't help but casually ask why she came back so late yesterday. Isabella shrugged and said something came up. She didn't give a reason, but I quickly figured it out. As soon as I walked into the classroom, I saw Diego smile at Isabella. "Morning, Isabella. By the way, thanks for walking me home yesterday." I froze, slowly looking up at Diego. He had a handsome smile, but I'd never found it so annoying. I'd heard about it before I moved to class 3. Diego and Isabella were tight. I tried to act like I didn't care, but I couldn't lie. I cared a lot, so the fact that Isabella mentioned walking Diego home hit me hard. I pressed my lips together, feeling a surge of anger. I didn't speak to Isabella the entire day. During a break, Diego suddenly came over and placed a cup of water on my desk. I turned my head, but before I could react, there was a shattering sound. Suddenly, Diego's voice echoed through the classroom. A lot of people turned to look, and the room went silent. Diego's face darkened as he stared at the broken cup in disbelief. His voice was irritated. "I just wanted to apologize for the other day, man." The cup was shattered, water everywhere. Diego took a deep breath and turned to me helplessly. "Let's just say I didn't hold it right." But the more he explained, the more everyone focused on me. I knew what those looks meant. I looked at Diego and it all clicked. It was the same old trick. I hated being falsely accused more than anything. In the brief pause as Diego pretended to be helpless, I suddenly grabbed him and started heading towards the teacher's office. "Stop pretending. I didn't even touch the cup. Let's check the security footage." Diego froze for a second, his face turning pale. He refused to go, causing a scene. After a few steps, someone suddenly stopped me. "That's enough." I frowned and looked down, only to see Isabella's face. It was like a bucket of ice water was poured over me. I was chilled to the bone. Isabella hadn't talked to me all day, but the first thing she said was to defend Diego. I knew Diego was doing all this because of Isabella. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of impatience and helplessness. "Don't make a scene. It's almost class time." There it was again, that dismissive attitude, just a few casual words. And she sided with Diego. The anger that had been simmering since last night flared up. My face darkened instantly, and I shoved Isabella slightly. "Isabella, do you think this is funny? Why should I keep letting Diego slander me? Are you going to say it's unnecessary again?" "Yes. It doesn't matter to you." "But it's very important to me." My sudden outburst stunned Isabella for a couple of seconds. She stared at me blankly, not expecting such a strong reaction. After a while, she blinked and choked out, "That's not what I meant." I insisted on checking the security footage, but Diego tried to stop me. I dropped it by accident. No need to bother the teacher over something so trivial the way things are. Anyone could see the problem wasn't with me. Many who defended Diego before didn't speak up this time. I sat back down, feeling extremely irritated. Isabella handed me a bottle of cold water, her eyes downcast as she looked at me. Liam, that's not what I meant. I ignored her. For the next few days, Isabella stayed close to me. We rarely fought, but after school, I turned and walked away, and it seemed like Isabella had finally had enough. She suddenly grabbed my sleeve, her hand cold, and there was a new, expensive watch on her wrist. It was the same watch I'd seen a couple of times online, too pricey for me to even think about buying. Even for someone like Isabella, who came from a well-off family, it wasn't something she'd buy lightly. I froze, looking at Isabella as she gazed up at me. Please don't be mad at me, okay? Without thinking, I tried to take it off and give it back to her. But Isabella stopped me. I wanted to give it to you anyway. But it's not your birthday yet, so it's a bit early. She still had a stern face, but I could feel my anger fading. When I got home, I cursed myself for being so spineless. Just as I finished, the phone rang. My aunt's voice came through, asking if I had thought about transferring schools and when I planned to move. I stared at the watch on my wrist and quietly said, I want to stay a little longer. Since my grandma passed away, the only reason I stayed here was Isabella. For the next few days, Isabella didn't mention Diego around me. I thought we were done with him. But then, on my birthday, I heard something. Isabella had been hanging out with Diego every day after school, taking walks together. My heart sank instantly. Thunder rumbled across the sky. It rained heavily on my birthday. Isabella was supposed to pick up the cake, but she had something last minute and asked me to get it. I wanted to ask her more over the phone, but she hung up quickly. I reassured myself I could ask her in person when we met. After picking up the cake, I stepped outside only to find the rain even heavier. To make matters worse, my car broke down. The place where Isabella had planned the party wasn't far. I held an umbrella in one hand and carried the cake in the other, hurrying towards the location, but I still ended up getting soaked. It was rare for Isabella to ask me to pick up the cake myself on my birthday. She probably had something more important to deal with. I kept telling myself that until I reached the door. But from the room, I distinctly heard Diego's voice. I froze, listening to his voice from the entrance with a hint of laughter. He said, "Thanks to our Isabella for agreeing to pick me up in this heavy rain." The door was slightly open. I stood there for a second, numbly lifting my gaze, only to see that everyone else had already arrived. There were even some unfamiliar faces. In the crowd, I saw the one person I least wanted to see. It wasn't my imagination. Diego was really there. Someone must have noticed me because a voice called out. Suddenly, all eyes were on me. My disheveled appearance was on full display for everyone to see. For a moment, the room fell into an awkward silence. Diego turned to look too, standing calmly beside Isabella. His clothes were clean and neat, in stark contrast to me. Water dripped from my sleeves. I stood there, soaked, holding the cake in front of everyone. I felt like a clown with nowhere to hide. I'd never felt so humiliated before. Anger churned inside me as I looked at Isabella, gritting my teeth. I asked her, "Why is Diego here?" Isabella hadn't expected me to be so upset, and her face changed immediately. I felt my fury trapped in my chest, ready to explode with a single word. I stared at Isabella without moving, repeating my question. "Why is Diego here? Have you been with him all these days? Did you come here with him today too?" Diego had arrived perfectly dry, and on my birthday, I was the laughingstock. Drenched and humiliated in front of everyone. Isabella knew how much I disliked Diego. I'd said it more than once. I didn't want to see Diego anymore. Why did it have to be today? Why did it have to be when I was at my lowest? Isabella stood there, stunned. She hurriedly tried to explain. "Diego said he wanted to formally apologize to you today, and he invited a lot of people to witness it. He even prepared a birthday gift. So I thought—" Isabella suddenly grabbed my wrist tightly. "I wanted to clear up the misunderstanding today. Diego is really a good guy. There's no need to hold a grudge. No need. There it was again. No need. Indeed, there was no need. I looked at Isabella, silently prying her fingers off my wrist. Then I removed the watch from my wrist and tossed it to her. This time, I didn't press her with questions or say anything at all. Something I had held on to for so long suddenly didn't seem worth it anymore. The day I left, I didn't tell Isabella. It was just an ordinary afternoon when I put a definitive end to things with Isabella. My aunt helped me with the transfer paperwork. She mentioned that when my name came up, a girl suddenly rushed out of class, choking back tears. She repeatedly asked where I had transferred to. My aunt asked if she was a good friend. I shook my head and smiled. Not anymore. My aunt didn't tell Isabella. Isabella couldn't find me. Liam, how can you be so chill? Aren't you nervous? The boss said tonight's party is going to be packed with all the big names in the industry. My colleague David's voice snapped me back to reality. The banquet hall was lively, brightly lit, and super luxurious. 7 years had passed since I transferred schools. After moving, I threw myself into my studies with no distractions. I nailed the college entrance exams. After graduating, I smoothly joined this company, snapping out of my thoughts. I paused for a second. Don't worry, there's nothing for small fry like us to stress over. You're calling yourself a small fry. You climbed to a position in 3 years that most can't reach in 10. Just as he finished, a sudden commotion arose at the front of the hall. In the midst of it, I seemed to catch a few mentions of Miss Lily. David swallowed nervously beside me. Miss Lily, she's a rich heiress. Not only is her family loaded, but she's also running her own company successfully. And she's here. I slowly furrowed my brows. Something clicked in my mind. I looked up. All I could see was a beautiful figure surrounded by people. The simple yet elegant custom-made dress she wore was clearly expensive at a glance. That profile was overwhelmingly familiar. Liam. A voice shattered all my thoughts. There were many people around her trying to chat, but her gaze pierced through the crowd, locking onto me in front of everyone. She even started walking toward me, step by step. Was it fun? Isabella stared at me, her eyes red, avoiding me for these entire 7 years. The hall fell silent, and almost every gaze was fixed on me. There were whispers, people sizing me up, trying to figure out how someone like me, a small-time employee, could be connected to Isabella. I looked down helplessly and met Isabella's gaze. She seemed changed over the years, yet somehow hadn't changed at all. Gone was the youthful innocence. After years of navigating society, she now exuded an aura that made her hard to approach. The Isabella of today was someone most people would go out of their way to say a few nice words to. I took a step back, increasing the distance between us, and quietly observed her. After all these years, I felt the same as I did 7 years ago. There wasn't much I wanted to say. Maybe my retreat was too obvious. As Isabella suddenly froze in place, she looked up at me, her voice choking. "Are you still going to avoid me?" The boss stood not far away, blinking rapidly as if pressing a camera shutter, his hints painfully clear. Over the years, I had dealt with many people, and saying the right words for the occasion had become second nature, but I didn't want to play along in front of Isabella. I simply asked her, "What status do you have that makes you worth avoiding?" At my words, many faces in the room changed, and Isabella's expression also paled slightly. "What status?" Isabella stared at me, a mix of unwillingness and hurt in her eyes. She wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes and softly asked me, "Liam, do you want me to help you remember?" "Remember what?" "Remember how she so clearly sided with Diego that year? Or remember that miserable birthday in the pouring rain?" The feelings of humiliation and frustration I had buried deep inside began to resurface, suppressing my emotions. I let out a couple of cold laughs and spoke with a trace of bitterness. "Isabella." I looked up at her, genuinely asking, "And who exactly are you to me?" Isabella had likely been riding high on her successes over the years, elevated by those around her. She frowned, her anger evident in her eyes. Those eyes glared at me fiercely, but when she spoke, her voice was hoarse. "Say that again." The atmosphere grew tense. The boss seized the moment, stepping in front of me and discreetly pushing me out of the way. The cold wind outside cooled my emotions. I hadn't expected to still get angry because of Isabella. David caught up to me, handing me a bottle of water and speaking nervously. "Miss Cole just now looked really scary. How do you know her?" The cool sensation of the water sliding down my throat only added to my exhaustion. "That's it for tonight. I'm heading back. Let the boss know for me." I had just reached the parking lot when a message from David popped up. "You're not here," and Miss Lily left without looking back. Could she be coming after you? My brow furrowed slightly. From behind, I could faintly hear the hurried click of high heels against the ground. Isabella had caught up. She was out of breath from running, her chest heaving as she looked up at me, feeling wronged. "How could you leave without saying anything? Are you planning to disappear quietly again?" I stared at her silently, with no intention of speaking, but my calm demeanor seemed to ignite something in Isabella. Her emotions began to crumble. "You've been avoiding me for 7 years, and you have nothing to say to me." I corrected her. "I wasn't avoiding you. Then why did you leave without a word? Why did you transfer schools without telling me? If I hadn't come looking for you, were you really planning to never see me again?" Leaning against the car, I let out a laugh. Who even remembers such old and trivial matters? That one sentence seemed to pierce Isabella deeply. She stared at me, and tears suddenly welled up in her eyes. "Don't remember? Liam, who gave you the right to forget?" Her words hit hard, like a heavy blow landing squarely on the heart of the 17-year-old Liam. I forced a cold laugh from my throat, locking eyes with Isabella. "Isabella, who do you think you are? Why should I remember those times of utter humiliation and disgrace? I'm no one." Of course, Isabella's face turned pale as she cried, but I wouldn't let her forget. Not wanting to continue this conversation, I turned to leave. But Isabella blocked my way. I thought I could control my emotions, but seeing Isabella in this self-righteous state, I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. Isabella looked up at me, stubborn and hurt. "Do you know how long I've been searching for you? Do you know how happy I was to see you today?" She didn't finish her sentence before a loud crashing sound echoed in the quiet parking lot. I turned towards the noise and saw Diego in the distance, though I hadn't noticed when he arrived. Something had shattered on the ground. Diego stood frozen, staring straight at us, still holding Isabella's coat. Diego had been by Isabella's side all these years. They both attended the same university. After graduation, Diego joined Isabella's company. This time, Isabella hadn't brought him along. He came on his own, wanting to surprise her. He stared at Isabella, his face dark with anger. His current expression reminded me so much of the Diego from years ago. I looked back at Isabella and let out a sarcastic laugh. The irony was too clear, and Isabella's face turned completely white. Diego approached, his eyes filled with irritation and disdain, as he forced a smile and greeted me. "Long time no see, Liam. You left school without saying a word back then, making it impossible for me to properly apologize." As he spoke, he naturally hooked his arm around Isabella's, clearly staking his claim. Just like it seemed, Diego hadn't changed at all over the years. But this time, before I could respond, Isabella suddenly pulled her arm away. She looked at Diego, her voice soft as she asked him, "Diego, didn't I tell you that if you wanted to stay in the company, you should stop saying things you shouldn't?" At her words, Diego's face turned as white as a sheet, but he still reached out to grab Isabella's wrist. "Isabella, are you still mad about last time? I won't do it again. Let's not make a scene. We can talk about it when we get back." "Okay." He was terrified that Isabella might say something in front of me. Isabella distanced herself from him, then looked up at me and explained, "Something happened years ago, and Diego saved my family, so my mother arranged for him to join the company." "Enough," Diego suddenly interrupted, his voice low and strained. "Don't treat me like this. Let's go back." "All right." Isabella ignored him and finished her sentence. Diego and I were never in a relationship. Isabella's explanation and Diego's irritated voice swirled in my mind. The chaotic reunion scene was giving me a headache. They seemed to be saying a lot, but I didn't really take any of it in. All I remember is that when my headache got worse and I tried to leave, Isabella grabbed my wrist. Her fingers gripped tightly. Isabella said that all these years, she had never forgotten me. She then asked me again, "What could I do to earn your forgiveness?" It's strange, the person I didn't care about before. What could she do to earn my forgiveness? It's weird, the person I didn't care about back then. How did she end up so deeply invested 7 years later? I couldn't figure it out, and I didn't want to. I pried her hand off and silently mouthed 3 words in front of her. Stop pretending. After putting some distance between us, I got in my car and drove away without looking back. I didn't want to have anything more to do with them. But early the next morning, the company group chat was buzzing. One explosive message after another popped up. Wow, whose Porsche is parked by the company entrance? Look at that license plate starting with 777. I saw the owner. She's stunning. But her presence is kinda intimidating. Didn't dare to look twice. The last time the group chat was this lively was when someone's wife publicly confronted a mistress. I sat up abruptly, my sleepiness gone, staring at the screen. A name was on the tip of my tongue. When I got to the company, the Porsche was still parked prominently outside. A lot of people were sneaking glances, gossiping. The owner didn't seem to mind being the center of attention. She leaned against the car, her head down, lost in thought. That familiar profile almost confirmed it for me at first glance. Isabella. As if sensing something, Isabella looked up sharply. She stared at me quietly, expressionless, but usually this kind of stance meant she wasn't going to let things go easily. She was angry that I had walked away without looking back last night. So she showed up at the company first thing to confront me. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Talk about what?" I found it amusing. What is there left to talk about between us? A lot, Isabella said seriously, looking at me. There's so much I've wanted to say to you over the years. And what if I say I don't want to hear it? Isabella looked at me silently for 2 seconds. You should know. Patience is something I have in abundance. Suit yourself. I looked away and walked into the company without another word. Isabella stayed downstairs the entire time. David and the new female intern kept glancing out the window. Isn't that Miss Lou? Has she gone crazy? She's not even leaving in the rain. The intern, Camilla, leaned over sweetly. Is she really here for Liam? She must have done something to make him mad. David took a sip of his coffee. And you'd know. Camilla, with an air of understanding, replied, Of course. Liam has such a good temper. He rarely refuses anyone. Women can be so tricky. David gave her a strange look. Aren't you a woman? How could I count? Camilla exclaimed, I would never make Liam mad. I only feel sorry for him. I glanced outside, where the rain was now falling steadily. The rain was especially cold in late autumn. Isabella stood under an umbrella, her eyes fixed on the building. She stood there alone. I couldn't see her expression clearly, but I could easily imagine it. Always cold, indifferent, with that stubborn streak. It was the same look Isabella used to have whenever she tried to cheer me up after making me upset. Once she set her mind on something, few could change it. After all these years, Isabella seemed even more persistent than before. I looked away and didn't say anything. It wasn't until night had fully fallen and everyone had left the office that I glanced down after finishing my overtime. Isabella was still there. I shut down my computer and left through the back door. That night, David started a group chat and, together with Camilla, they went back and forth, determined to pry open the story between me and Isabella. I was forced to stay up late after the conversation while brushing my teeth. The chat suddenly exploded with 999 plus messages, all filled with their concerned comments about Isabella. Before bed, Camilla sent me a private message. Liam, I gave Isabella a piece of my mind. How did I do? Camilla always liked to talk big, so I didn't think much of it and just told her to get some sleep. The next day, Isabella still hadn't left. She was determined to stay and play hardball. I glanced over, then smoothly entered the company through the back door. Not long after I got in, there was a sudden commotion inside the company. Even the boss was alerted. David returned, looking conflicted. Isabella, she's something else. I frowned. What did she do? She probably wants to add you on WeChat. Ignore it. Of course I ignored it. David raised his hand and pointed downstairs. But plenty of others didn't. Under my gaze, David finally spoke up. Anyone who gives her your WeChat gets a 100,000 won reward. The next second, my phone vibrated. A message from a colleague in the adjacent department appeared. Sorry, Liam, but she offered too much. My phone buzzed again. Another friend request. It's Isabella. I pinched the bridge of my nose, feeling a headache coming on. Before I could fully process the situation, there was another burst of commotion. It seemed like the company had used up 3 years' worth of gossip in just a few days. A flashy sports car had provocatively parked in front of Isabella's Porsche. Gossip always draws a crowd. A bunch of people were leaning out the windows to watch. Who's that now? No idea. Hey, they're getting out of the car. Wait, why does that person look familiar? Isn't that Liam's new intern, the heiress? My brow furrowed as I looked closely. And sure enough, it was Camilla. Camilla got out of the car, took off her sunglasses, and gave Isabella a once-over, then let out a sneer and flipped her the middle finger. She seemed to say something. I couldn't hear it clearly, but it definitely wasn't anything nice. I sighed, picked up my phone, and headed downstairs. By the time I got downstairs, the two of them were already at it. I knew very well that Isabella had a bad temper. After years of living in luxury, there was no way she would tolerate a university student provoking her. Camilla had a large bruised cut on the corner of her mouth. She wiped it gently, looked down at me, and spoke in a sweet tone. Liam, I'm fine. Even if she hit me first, I fought back. Camilla hadn't been at the company long and was always protective of her face. I knew she was standing up for me, but I didn't expect it to get this far. A sudden wave of frustration hit me, and I turned coldly to Isabella. Have you had enough? Even if Camilla said something, did it really warrant hitting her first? As soon as I finished speaking, Isabella, who had been standing stunned, slowly looked up at me. She seemed more disheveled than I'd ever seen her. Her face didn't look much better than Camilla's, probably worse. She didn't seem to care about the injury. Her pale face was filled with shock, hurt, and disbelief. I was the one who hit first. Camilla beside me let out a soft, "Ouch, don't be mad, Liam. It's just a little cut. It'll heal in a few days. It doesn't hurt. Let's head back to the company." As I turned to leave, Isabella suddenly grabbed my wrist. She looked at me stubbornly, tears streaming down her face. So you're just going to take her word for it, without even asking me, and assume I hit her first? I shook her hand off. If you want to talk, we can do it after work. Camilla turned around and smirked at Isabella. Isabella stayed until the end of the workday. She just stood there with her bruised face, not getting any treatment, stubbornly waiting until evening. I left the company with Camilla. Isabella walked over, about to speak, when Camilla suddenly let out another soft, "Ouch." She reached out her hand to me. Liam, my hand hurts. I don't think I can drive. Seeing that hand, Isabella suddenly felt her face sting. Then, as if realizing something, she took a step forward, looking at me. You promised we would talk. Camilla lowered her eyes. I can manage the pain. If you have something to do, it's okay. You don't need to take me home. I looked at Camilla. I'll take you home first. Isabella stood frozen, staring at me in shock. The light in her eyes dimmed bit by bit. On the way, Camilla confessed to me, Liam, it was actually me who hit first. I treated you that way before. Now it's her turn to know what it feels like not to be trusted. I understand. I looked at her. But don't use this method again. It's a shame to hurt that face. Camilla paused, then smiled, her eyes curving. All right. When I got back, the sky was already dark, and Isabella was still standing in the dim light, all alone. For some reason, seeing her like that reminded me of a deserted animal, but Isabella was never mine to begin with. I looked at her. After all this, let's clear the air. Say whatever you need to say. It wasn't me who hit first today. Isabella was silent for a moment before blurting out the words. I hadn't expected Isabella to still be hung up on this. That doesn't matter. Get to the point. It does matter, Isabella insisted, staring at me stubbornly. Liam, you never used to be so biased. The words hung in the air, so long ago. People change over time. Besides, now to me, Camilla isn't someone else. You are. The sky was almost fully dark. The night was cold. Isabella stood there, repeating the words softly, as if tasting them on her tongue. Someone else. She lowered her eyes and forced a smile. When she spoke again, her voice was choked. A few days before your birthday, after school, I was with Diego because he kept asking me to help him apologize to you. I knew you didn't like seeing him, so I didn't tell you. On your birthday, Diego said he had already bought a birthday gift and invited a lot of people. He just wanted to apologize sincerely, so I helped him. All these years, I never had anything to do with Diego. After finishing her explanation, Isabella looked up. Her eyes met mine, reflecting my image. She quietly waited for my response. Okay, I understand, I said, tightening my coat. Is that all? Then let's go home. It's cold. Isabella looked at me, her eyes suddenly welling up with tears. So you left without a word all this time, and you have nothing to say to me. It's pretty ironic, really, the issues Isabella talked about. I had thought about them many times late at night after I transferred schools. How could Isabella, who was so close to me, suddenly side with a guy she hadn't known for long? I never understood, and I couldn't forget Isabella, so I was frustrated for a long time. Isabella's presence seeped into every part of my life. I kept telling myself over and over that it was all in the past. It wasn't until I no longer cared that I finally got this weak, meaningless explanation. No, I looked at her. You've already explained everything, Isabella. Let's end this here. I don't want to. Isabella suddenly stepped forward and threw herself into my arms. Her fingers tightened and her voice trembled as she spoke. I could feel that Isabella was crying hard. She said, Liam? After you transferred, I searched for you for so long that day, I didn't expect the rain to be so heavy. All these years, I kept thinking if only I hadn't made you pick up the cake. If only I hadn't agreed to Diego's request, but you left so quickly without giving me a chance to explain. I asked in return, was it me who didn't give you a chance, Isabella? Time and again. When did you not side with him? Yes, these were all small things. But Isabella, you've always been smart. Could you really not tell if Diego was lying or not? I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Isabella's voice was choked with emotion. Please don't avoid me anymore. That year, I searched for you in so many cities, but I could never find you. My chest felt cold and damp in the chilly wind. I had never imagined that someone as proud as Isabella could cry so miserably. She always liked to follow me, knowing that no matter what trouble she caused, I could easily solve it for her. Back then, I never thought there would be a day when Isabella and I would part ways. But reality taught me that relying too much on someone would eventually lead to a hard fall. I had fallen. And it hurt. A lot. It took me years to move on. I gently pushed Isabella away and whispered, This is the end, Isabella. Don't come looking for me anymore. Isabella's eyes turned red, her face pale. Her voice was so dry and strained that she could barely speak. I turned and started walking away. I heard a faint, soft voice behind me, filled with pain and sorrow. She said, I can't. After that, the Porsche no longer appeared near the company, but every morning a florist would show up at the office to deliver flowers. Mr. Cole, these flowers were freshly picked. May you have a pleasant day. At noon, someone would bring lunch specifically for me. David came over. Isn't this from our favorite restaurant? It's insanely expensive. The restaurant staff smiled. Mr. Cole is one of our top VIPs. If you have any favorite ingredients, feel free to let us know anytime. And it wasn't just this restaurant. Every place I visited had me listed as a VIP under my name. Even the mortgage on my current house had been paid off in advance by someone. Every single gesture. I didn't need to think hard to know who was behind it. Isabella, David said, his eyes wide as he struggled to find the words. She's really rich. I tried contacting her multiple times to return the money. Every time, Isabella sent it back. She said it was compensation for the guilt she felt from the past. The next time I saw Isabella was at the company's team-building camping trip. The boss mentioned that there would be a rare meteor shower tonight. The best view would be right where we were. The whole way there, David and Camilla kept chatting non-stop, making my ears ache. We finally reached the destination, and things quieted down a bit. But of course, I spotted Isabella. She was standing not far away, in the wind, back to her usual cold and aloof demeanor that warned people to keep their distance. The Isabella who had cried with red eyes that night seemed like a dream. She looked over at me from a distance. She smiled and said, "What a coincidence." Camilla Grilling Skewers sneered, "Miss Cole, that's a funny joke. Your company is miles away from here." "True," Isabella nodded, "but the branch office is nearby. When did you open a branch here?" Isabella responded calmly, "Just now." Camilla rolled her eyes. Ridiculous. Isabella wasn't joking. Her branch office was really about to be established nearby. But claiming she was bringing employees for team building seemed a bit far-fetched. Among the group, I still spotted Diego. However, he seemed more subdued, staring at Isabella but not approaching like before. Isabella came over to chat with the boss. The boss had always wanted to collaborate with Isabella's company, so he didn't refuse. As they talked, the conversation turned to the food supplies Isabella had brought. Isabella had been extravagant, bringing twice as many supplies as our company. Isabella seized the moment and suggested, "Why don't we join forces? It'll be more lively." The boss agreed happily. Camilla scoffed. "Isabella is obviously here for Liam." The boss knocked her on the head. "You think I don't know? It's free stuff. Why not take advantage?" Camilla handed the boss a burnt skewer. "Isn't that selling out?" The boss sighed. "Haven't you noticed? Liam has already moved on." The two companies mingled, making the event more lively. But no matter what I was doing, Isabella would come over to help. She took the skewers from my hand, the oil sizzling, and asked, "How have you been lately?" I replied, "Everything's been fine." "That's good." As I chatted with Isabella, I could feel Diego's gaze fixed on me. Later, he found a reason to come over and talk to me. I thought he had changed until the hot soup spilled on his hand. Just like 7 years ago, that's when I realized he hadn't grown at all. The noise drew everyone's attention. People from both companies looked at each other, not knowing what to say. Diego probably wanted to pull the same trick, trying to make my life difficult at the company. He had succeeded before. I never really fit in at Class 3. But now, before I could say anything, David and Camilla rushed over. "Seriously, you haven't had enough. Come on, if you're going to frame someone, at least pick the right setting. This is our company's turf. Do you really think you can mess with Liam? And even if Liam did it, you probably deserved it." Voices surrounded him from all sides. Things weren't going the way he imagined. And Diego stood there, frozen. His words stuck in his throat. His face darkened, and he turned to look at his own company. But Isabella stepped in front of him. She looked at Diego. Her voice was as cold as ice. "Diego, when we get back to the office, submit your resignation and move to another city." As soon as she said that, no one else spoke up for Diego. All the color drained from Diego's face. I grabbed a nearby bottle of cold water and poured it over his head. With a loud splash, the water soaked him. Diego shivered violently. He looked up at me, disbelief in his eyes. I looked at Diego and smiled, telling him, "This time, it really was me. You've been dying for me to pour something on you, so how could I not oblige? After a day of cold winds, we still didn't get to see the meteor shower. When Isabella went to get a scarf, the darkness around us was too thick, and she twisted her ankle after missing a step. She sat on the ground, her face pale. By the time I realized what had happened, Isabella had already grabbed my wrist. The mountain path was too rough for cars. Isabella's voice trembled with pain. "It hurts so much. Please help me." I sighed, and finally carried her down the mountain. The night air was cold, and Isabella was in so much pain that a fine layer of sweat formed on her forehead. As she clung to my back, she asked through her pain, "Am I too heavy?" Her voice was trembling, filled with the same kind of sadness and hurt as that night. For a moment, it merged with the voice of the younger Isabella, making me feel dazed. I said, "Not really." Isabella, trying to distract herself from the pain, talked about many things. She brought up a lot from our childhood, things I knew and things I didn't. She also asked if I remembered the watch she had given me before my birthday. I had never gotten around to asking how Isabella knew I liked that watch. Isabella laughed softly, saying she had noticed when I first looked at it and had been planning to get it for a long time. "That watch," she said, "is still carefully kept in my drawer." I felt a lump in my throat and kept my eyes on the dark path ahead, saying nothing. Isabella continued, telling me that on my birthday, when I walked into the rain without looking back, she was about to chase after me when she got a phone call. There was an emergency at home. She rushed back and was swamped with problems for the next few days. She'd planned to find me and talk things over as soon as she was done. Back then, she wouldn't have done anything to make me mad, no matter what I said. But by the time she was free, I had suddenly disappeared. Her calls were blocked, and suddenly, she had no way to reach me. She thought I was throwing a tantrum, so she bought a cake and waited outside my house for a whole day and night. The cake melted into a mess, but the door never opened. Then one day, she saw someone at school handling my transfer paperwork. Isabella's mind went blank, and she realized something was seriously wrong. She ran out. She begged my aunt repeatedly. But in the end, my aunt never told her the exact address. Isabella let out a soft, bitter laugh as she recounted this. Her voice was filled with a mix of resentment and guilt. She said that I had transferred schools without saying a word, not even a goodbye. I kept my eyes down, unsure of what to say, and tried to change the subject, just like she had. I said, "Stop making me a VIP everywhere and don't pay off my mortgage. I'll pay you back slowly." Isabella suddenly fell silent. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice rough. "Do you really not want to have anything to do with me?" I replied, "I don't want to owe anyone. The Cole family took care of me a lot back then. Let's call it even. No one owes anyone anything." Isabella shook her head, saying she didn't want that. The cold wind howled in my ears. I could hear Isabella's voice trembling. I sighed. After a moment of silence, I said, "In a little while, I'll be leaving this city to head up the branch office." Isabella, still on my back, suddenly stiffened. The wind was too cold. Isabella took a sharp breath, and her tears started falling again. Her voice mingled with the wind, each word accompanied by deep breaths. "You're leaving again," I quietly replied. After that, Isabella didn't say another word. She stayed silent, not speaking again but kept wiping away her tears. I took Isabella to the hospital, handling everything from start to finish. The hospital room was so quiet that only her breathing could be heard. Isabella lay on the bed, staring at me without moving. It was as if she was trying to etch my image into her mind. After what felt like a long time, she finally spoke, smiling as she asked, "When will you come back?" But that smile was painfully forced. I said, "Who knows? Maybe I will. If things go well, maybe I'll never come back." Isabella's eyelashes fluttered gently. Her eyes were filled with a sadness I had never seen before. Then, "Will we ever see each other again?" I looked out the window and shook my head slightly. Probably not. As the words left my mouth, the light in Isabella's eyes was completely swallowed by the darkness. She lowered her head and cried for a long, long time. Finally, she managed to choke out a faint, "Okay." The day I left the city, it snowed. The air was filled with a biting chill. I knew that Isabella was somewhere not far behind me. Dependence is a dangerous thing. I had fallen once and gotten badly hurt. When I chose to leave back then, I never intended for things to return to how they were. The idea of fixing a broken mirror is just too unrealistic. I would never throw myself back into the downpour of my teenage years. I held on to my suitcase. Step by step, I walked forward. I never looked back.